Earlier this week, some folks said I was stereotyping white voters in New Orleans when I said that 80% of them voted the same way and that you were joining Trump voters in the process of that. Well, the Supreme Court heard a case yesterday concerning Louisiana's congressional maps, and the liberal justices specifically talked about stereotyping because that's one of the talking points that was used by the conservatives. Let me let you hear from the justices, and then I'll tell you what I think. It's going to take you a few minutes, but it's worth it.
I spoke about stereotyping and how there's no place for stereotyping. But I'm wondering what stereotyping has to do with any of this. The requirements of a Section 2 vote dilution claim are essentially that there's residential segregation by race. That's not stereotyping. That's just where people live. And that there is racial bloc voting. Essentially, that whites won't vote for a black candidate. That's not stereotyping either. That's just what the data shows about racially bloc voting. So I'm wondering how it is that stereotyping gets into this case at all.
Well, Your Honor, two points. First of all, stereotyping is the remedy that occurs when race predominates and is used to sort voters into one district or the other. And the reason that's important is to go back to the second kind of predicate to your question. In a Jingles showing, the showing that's made is not that white voters or majority voters won't vote for the minority candidate. The only showing that's currently being made is correlation. And so what we're not seeing in cases today is a showing that we can separate out partisan politics, any partisan motivations that the majority or minority voters have. And so that case could come along, but that's not part of the required showing of Jingles the way courts are applying it.
Well, I think that, we've had several cases up here where we've acknowledged that there's some interaction between race and partisan affiliation. Obviously, that's right. And the task for the courts is to separate those things out, which may be hard in a given case, may be easier in a given case. But the only thing that's at issue, the violation, is where there's racially bloc voting. And again, it's just a there. There is currently, in order to prove a Section 2 violation, you have to show that the current conditions, not some old conditions that happened in 1962 or in 1982, but the current conditions are such that there's no equal opportunity for African American voters or some other group because there's racially bloc voting. And I guess I don't see where stereotyping comes into that. It's just there's a there that African Americans can't elect candidates of their choice.
Well, the problem, though, is in the remedy. The problem is that when you are drawing your remedial district, which is the very first part of Jingles, that may not be the final district you end up with, but just to reach, I'm covering your question and a question Justice Jackson asked. The very first thing the plaintiff shows is here's the community that was cracked or packed. And so to undo that, you have to look at the race of the voters all around that area, and you've got to make assumptions about them based on statistics, but you've got to make assumptions about what they think and how they vote based on their race, and you're drawing new districts based on that.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing that we decided in Milligan, because what the state said in Milligan was that the plaintiffs could not use a map that was at all race-based themselves in order to show that there was a way out of this kind of vote dilution, these kinds of vote dilution practices. And the court said, of course you can do something that is race-based, even though not race predominant, that we're not going to insist that you come in and ignore the factor of race when the only reason we're here is because race has played such an integral part in the voting process that people are being deprived of their voting rights because of race.
Well, Justice Kagan, the plurality in that section of Milligan drew the line between race-conscious and race-predominant districting. Race-based appears, and maybe we need to define all of our terms, it appears in the decision. But I think what is clear from that case is that the remedial maps can't allow race to predominate. I mean, the court said that the remedial map, the illustrative map, can't violate the court's redistricting decisions. And of course, there's the entire Shaw line.
I don't think that there's any dispute as to that point, but we're a long way from racial predominance to have the plaintiffs come in with a map that in order to remedy the race-based problem that exists, the violation of voting rights based on race, itself takes race into account.
Well,
that's what Milligan said 3 years ago.
The problem,
and that wasn't a stereotype issue, and it wasn't a kind of like we're based on past conditions issue. We're based on current conditions, which is that we just proved a violation of people's voting rights based on current conditions.
Stereotyping is always the main injury in a Shaw case. It's always the injury when race predominates.
But you're asking for changes to Section 2, which is not the Shaw case. That's the confusion. I understood that the illustrative maps that the plaintiffs bring in the beginning of a Shaw case is part of their showing that we have a problem. They're illustrative. They're not what Louisiana picked in this case. They're not what the court requires. The court gives the state, once the violation is established, the opportunity to draw its own map. So they're just showing, like that's just a step that you have to do as a part of your showing that we do have this vote dilution problem in this situation. And as Justice Kagan says, that's all based on current information.
Well, but the question is, what's that is based on current information? It's not a showing of intentional discrimination.
Why does it need to be? Is your suggestion that the only thing that's worthy of remedying is the intentional discrimination by the state?
If the remedy is stereotyping and race-based,
set aside what the remedy is. I just need an answer to the initial question, right? If I'm looking only at Section 2 world, we have a mechanism for identifying race-based vote dilution and other kinds of problems. Is your view that you only are entitled to some remedy for that if you demonstrate that the state intentionally is causing this to happen to you?
Well, that's not current doctrine under Jingles, but the problem is
that your argument? Is that what you're saying we have to do?
Our argument is that if you're going to allow a race-based remedy, it must be in response to intentional discrimination.
So you don't get a remedy for an actual dilution or problem with your vote, the kinds of things that Congress cared about and that the Constitution requires. You don't get a remedy unless this was intentional on the part of the state with respect to you.
Which is a constitutional vote dilution claim which people always can be bringing.
Thank you, counsel. Now, when you listen to the justices talk, what's clear is that black voters in Louisiana are being violated. That the data shows you that there's a pattern in the voting history of white voters in Louisiana. Even when you separate the political parties and put us in Republicans and Democrats, white Democrats rarely want to vote for the black candidate, according to the data. Now, there were folks who were saying that I was stereotyping those people. Well, Justice Kagan said that's not stereotyping. And there were other folks who were just saying, well, that's a correlation in the data. Well, Justice Kagan also said that doesn't matter because the data shows that there is a there. And if you see that something exists over a history and a pattern of time, it gives you a reflection or a window to see what's going on in your local community. There are people who say, well, they're not intending to be racist. If the impact or the end result is more racist outcomes for black people, it's a problem. And so I'm going to always challenge people to be thoughtful and mindful that race does play a part in these elections every single time. And the Supreme Court justices agree with me on that. Maybe you should pay attention to what I said rather than what you feel about what I said. Do good, seek justice, keep pushing.